activated and erupt with a devouring light. But because of this, the weavings of records deeply entrenched and hidden across existence are becoming prevalent to you. The quality of records is quintessential, with the authority of the weaver devouring them all greedily. Boom! Singularities of vermilion-colored flames erupted around him like a storm. Not too far from him, the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal Haven was too indisposed to even glance in his direction, as she was managing the assimilation of the incoming records of existence. After all, this was 100th of both Vitalis and Vacuous. It was tremendous. And now with chunks of a domain they should in no way have access to, things became obscene. The Weaver of Extremity looks his gaze upon domains entrenched in the depths of the Ionic annals of Extremity. The weavings of the domains of the legacies of Alavalum and Ignatius unveil themselves before your eyes. Your authority as the Weaver is increasing at a rapid pace. You are gradually moving your stage of increase. A tremendous inflow of information unfolded as apart from this, Noah felt his existential extremity rune scriptures exploded upwards in number. His existential extremity authorities being elevated to an alarming degree while he was learning many things. Amongst them was the identity of those above the Dicastes of Extremity. Amongst them was the knowledge of just how terrifying his enemies were. The masters of the Dicastes of Extremity that have walked upon the Archeos Vitalis Pylos and the Archeos Vacuous Pylos become prevalent to you. You have caught a glimpse of the Basilius of Al-Abalum. You have caught a glimpse of the Basilius of Ignatius. Noah's mind buzzed as from the small chunks of domains he devoured in lands he should have never access to. He was able to see the weavings of those who had stepped on them before. Weavings of entities so grand that they even caused a sense of suffocation. Weavings of those who were truly above extremity. Just their knowledge alone was enough to cause common beings to turn despondent and understand that they could never stand against such creatures. Yet when Noah learned about them, he didn't have throngs of fear rising, as even the sense of suffocation was quickly cast aside. Because, one by one, legacies shall fall. White and black will come under the heel of the call. Noah steeled his existence as he repeated the prophecy that he as the protagonist had enacted himself. The weavings of the extremity of the protagonist are becoming even more profound in order to realize the reality of the features it has brought to fruition. Noah's body was suffused by a vermilion-colored light as thick tendrils of this authority wrapped around his body. One last prompt coming that caused a click to book within his existence, as if he had opened something he didn't have access to before. Your authority as the Weaver of Extremity has reached its first metamorphosis. Chapter 2892. Unforgivable. Quintessential clarity boomed in him. What felt foreign and difficult to understand and do before became easy. Quintessence. Tyranny. Infinity. Protagonist. Their roots within him entrenched themselves ever deeper as what they stood for. Their desires, their intent, their weaving, it grew ever more. Your authority as the Weaver of Extremity has risen to such an extent that in addition to being capable of grasping the weaving of Extreme's records in existence, you can now begin to experience their weavings as if you were there. A prompt came down in a shocking fashion amidst all of this as Noah's authority was further expanded. And as if to show him just to what extent, a part of his consciousness began to drift and go towards the weaving of a lost record eons ago. As if he would see a difference in what he could grasp back then and what he could grasp now. The eyes of the Weaver of Extremity cross innumerable weavings to land in the lost and eradicated record of Emperor Delbert. Noah's will followed the weavings of what Castes of Extremity sought to wipe out entirely, as his gaze came to the balcony of a castle made of materials sufficient to make a middle-grade armament of Extremity. It shone with a crystalline blue and white glow as it floated above the supernal haven of Genesis, high in the skies as if it were overlooking other beings. On this balcony was the visage of a man who held in his hands a burning cyan-colored flame, this flame moving about erratically as in his immediate surroundings, the authority of Vitalis was actually pushed away. What a wonder you are, relativity. His voice was deep and full of power. Noah seemed to be looking at him from above, but in the next moment, S.A.! His figure sank down from above and actually flowed into the visage of Emperor Delbert, an emperor who unified the Vitalis hyperversal domains eons ago before he was eradicated by the Decastas of Extremity. Noah sank into his body as shockingly when he opened his eyes again. He gazed around, not as himself, not as his normal self, but as Emperor Delbert. He was Emperor Delbert. It wasn't a possession or an experience. He truly and succinctly felt that he was truly this being. The Weaver of Extremity has unearthed and stepped into the past weaving of existence of Emperor Delbert. The synchrony percentage is of middle tier. The weavings of the life, memories, concepts, and extremes of Emperor Delbert become prevalent to him. Everything this being had experienced and accomplished was flowing into Noah's will, along with the cyan-colored flames he was playing with. The extremity of relativity that under the hands of Emperor Delbert was about to achieve the existential level. Noah felt this extreme. He had it himself and understood it deeply, but at this moment he felt this extreme as it was about to achieve the cusp of something great, as it was about to attain the existential level. The pathway of taking relativity to the existential level has been experienced by you before. Weavings of this experience have been saved, as at any point in time when the breadth of the existence of the Weaver of Extremity has been expanded to be capable of supporting another existential extremity authority, relativity can be taken to such a level. The differences in what he could do before and what he could do now became clear. And the results were so utterly terrifying that before Noah could fully go through them. Why do you all have such an overabundance of greed? Even with the whole Vitalis hyperversal domains under you, you still seek for more and more. Noah felt the intent of a Decastas of Extremity behind him, the one who would reap the life and records of the past Emperor Delbert. At this instant, the scene froze. Only Noah's figure remained movable, as while keeping the existence of Emperor Delbert, he turned around to gaze at the entity that had erased everything about him. The Vitalis Decastas of Extremity. The wide-spanning wings and the serpentine pupils were as clear as day, with their frozen authority just as menacing as always. Noah found himself walking towards this terrifying entity in his frozen record as he studied its features closely, and he then came to wonder as he stopped in front of it. Just like Emperor Delbert, could he step into the weaving of this entity? Could he step into the existence of a Decastas of Extremity? They could feel it. He hadn't just taken the records of existence of the Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains below, he had also taken a bite out of their holy lands, out of their Archeos Vitalis Pylos. This was why it was so much more unforgivable. When had a seed ever dared to do something like this? When had a corrupted seed managed to not just attain corruption and deviate from their norms, but then go forward to eat up the existential extremity authorities of the lands they lived? Unforgivable. Destro-y-her bellowed out. A mere corrupted seed dared? An insect that boasted so much about quintessence, only to keep it as a dead path and expand other things, actually dares. Destro-y-her was enraged. She knew the history of Noah Osmont well, and went through all available accounts from the eyes of other seeds in the Vitalis hyperversal domains. Within the extremity vein of dissolution, he had called himself the true emperor of quintessence. Within the supernal havens, he was the true emperor of quintessence. And yet such a being couldn't even live up to this name, and he actually grew so bold as to do what he just did? Not even in terms of being bold, just the capability to do this was an impossible thing. Yet, a moment later, the visage of Destro-y-her and Destro-y-her appeared above them. But they weren't alone. Dozens of other exquisitely adorned and majestic entities emanating undeniable waves of power appeared beside them. They came here as it was the center point of the explosion of the foreign existential extremity authorities, and it was from this point that the surrounding records began to be devoured. They ascertained what had occurred as their eyes quickly shifted from apathy to cold rage. Only the eyes of Destro-y-her were calm and calculating, as a moment later, beside her, the figure of the enraged Destro-y-her had his intent breathed out commandingly. Convene a meeting with the Black Hats. No more waiting and seeing or leaving it in the hands of you lot. We shall call forward that. Chapter 2891, Unforgivable. Esek. His words were filled with terrifying power and apathy as Cavalier Raelira and the others bowed down succinctly. Intents weaved from them and traversed great distances as the Basilius above them gazed at the weaving of their surroundings to ascertain the extent of the damage. Basilius Anain, even at this moment, had a calm and inquisitive gaze as behind her, from among the crowd of dozens of Basilius, a man with white gold hair spoke coldly. The emerged existential extremity authorities do not have a high enough existential arena to come close to the power of the and yet for them to do this insurgent has something else backing it. The source of power to do this is far beyond their supposed capabilities. The Basilius analyzed everything succinctly, as if his eyes could see everything. Basilius Anine smiled at these words that were similar to hers not too long ago, as her figure began to turn hazy and disappear. Yes, but we likely won't find out what, as the moment we proceed with that, everything will be over. You all prepare to meet with the Black Hats. I will talk with Father. Such dangerous words were left behind as the weaving of Basilius Anane flowed deeper into the Archeos Vitalis Pylos. The flaming white skies and cloudy earth passed for millions upon millions of light years as she crossed massive round structures and buildings within the span of an instant. The paradisiacal lands she crossed, showing content, cylindrical beams of pure white authority that was light years in size, shooting from the cloudy earth below and towards the flaming skies. Some of these massive streams of pure Vitalis hyperversal authority flowed and mixed, converging together and flowing towards who knew where. Basilius Anine crossed these vast distances within the span of an instant, as the very record of existence around her changed constantly, to the point that when she came to a stop, she was already standing in front of the biggest, most majestic white circular structure at the very center of the Archeos Vitalis Pylos. She waved her hands as her figure became adorned with a more regal white gold robe, the inscription of Alabalam labeled on its back as on her blessed chest. A symbol surrounded by a hazy, indiscernible light could barely be made out. She took another step and disappeared into the grand structure ahead of her, as when the weaving of existence settled once more, she was standing on a marbled white hall of immense brilliance. It was housed within the structure she had entered, and yet when one looked above, all they could see were roiling tendrils of pure existential extremity authority of Vitalis. And at the center of this hall was a sizable table that only held a single throne at its head. Atop the table, gorgeous and fantastical-looking translucent objects that closely resembled fruits could be seen, as on the only throne at the head of the table. An existence of shocking stature and demeanor sat down while his hands moved, constantly taking the translucent objects on the table and swallowing them without end. His hair shone with a blinding radiance as his majestic figure emanated the aura of an ancient emperor who had lived for countless eons. Every movement of his emanated precision and power, as he didn't stop eating even after Basilius Anine came in, his head only rising slightly as his pupils, his pupils. They were like 2 points of translucent light that one could not see the ends of, where if you looked for longer than a few seconds you may just be lost forever. Father, I presume you already know all the happenings out there without me needing to report anything to you. Father, she called him this, but he was known by another terrifying distinction, Archon Basilius al-Abalim. I know. His words were plain, not an ounce of authority, not the weavings of an intent, just plain words submitted by sound. Yet this alone felt like a booming clap in the ears of Basilius Anaine, as she remained rooted to the spot, gazing at her father who continued to eat the dazzling fruit like objects on the marbled white table. They will convene with the Black Hats. The Basilius of Ignatius will all likely agree as the Archon Basilius Ignatius will reach out to enact. Again! At these words, the existence at the head of the table stopped eating briefly as he chewed what was in his mouth with grace before he wiped his lips and looked at his daughter. His gaze alone was so intense that Basilius Anine had to lower her eyes in the face of it, his voice echoing out. My daughter, do you know why I was put in charge of this place? Wah! His question was a succinct one as Basilius Anine smiled coldly with her downed gaze as she played along. Why were you, father? I used all my accomplishments to ask for it, solely because these lands held the weavings of endings and beginnings and the taste of the fruits of existence extracted here. It is utterly succinct. As he spoke, he grasped one of the fruits that seemed to be endlessly getting refilled on the massive marbled table, translucent in nature and emanating an enticing glow to the very core of any entity. Fruits of existence. It was all for the taste, father. With a smile, Basilius Anane affirmed as the Archon Basilis Alabalum nodded with seriousness. Yes, to a certain point, it becomes addictive. Forget its uses and what it grants to one's existence. Just the taste of it alone is enough for the Archons of any legacies to want to occupy lands like these for eons, amassing tremendous wealth like I have over these past epochs, as even now, some legacies gaze over here with greed. Crunch! He resumed eating as he spoke. With every bite he took, the light within his eyes seemed to get even more shocking and powerful. Opposite him, Basilius Anane seemed to nod with understanding as she replied, I see. It seems that father will feel a great deal of pain if you have to spend this wealth of yours. I cannot imagine how many fruits of existence will be required to enact that. No, my daughter, you cannot imagine. The cost of the Codex of Extremity is one that no Basilius can bear, especially when it comes because your progeny are so useless to cause the need for the usage of something extremely costly. Chapter 2892. Unforgivable. His words were calm, but it felt like all the surrounding reality turned icy, as in the next instant, Basilius emotionlessly sank to her knees. Useless progeny often disappoint, but they learn from their mistakes. They'll make sure something like this doesn't happen again. So you say? The words rolled out of his mouth as if every single one could shatter the core of an entity at the 9th gradation of extremity. Mistakes, they are costly to power. The fruits of existence are power. We extract and squeeze the lands and the seeds within them for eons to steadily produce this source of power, and losing a portion of it will be a source of weakness that other legacies will come to know. Like rats, I can already feel some sniffing around. So how does my daughter think I prepare for emergencies like this? To be ready for failures that when they do occur, my position won't be the least bit shaken? He chewed the fruit of existence in his mouth while twirling another in his right hand. His face emanated sharp masculine beauty and grace, his eyes shining like clear lanterns that could see through everything, as the surrounding existence was very calm around him. Basilius Anane rose from her kneeling position with a calm expression as her gaze focused on the fruit of existence dangling in her father's hands. Since father has stated that the fruits of existence are power, then naturally you must have a great deal of them, more than what all others believe you have. That way, even if you lose some, you will still hold more power than what others believe. Precisely, daughter. A small, barely discernible smile formed as the ends of the lips of the Archon Basilius Alabalum curved. The biggest lesson I can pass to you, my daughter, is to not just fool others with the weavings of your power, but to also fool yourself. Never let others know the extent of your power, nor should your existence ever be limited by what you believe is the extent of your power. Akin to an elder teaching a child, the Archon Basilius Alabalum spoke. Standing on the marbled floor, Basilius Anane smiled brightly, her eyes not veiling a sharp light within them as she looked at her father. That, father, is a lesson I will engrave deeply in my heart. Good. Now, once that is initiated, many restrictions will also rise as after it. These lands will be reset and fully cleansed. All the seeds being cultivated this whole time will be gone, as while new ones arise, the extraction of fruits of existence will be arduously slow. Our legacy will not be able to earn much profit in the near term as to keep up appearances. We still need to keep sending our eonic tributes. In this period of time, all of you will need to put in the work and accelerate the extraction as much as possible. Horrific words left his mouth casually. He stated that lands would be reset, that all seeds will be gone as new ones would rise. He spoke so simply as Basilius Anane just gave a nod. Understood, father. I will relay this to the others right away. After these words, the Archon Basilius Alabalum waved his hands towards her dismissively while he began to grasp more fruits of existence, his voice echoing out in low tones. With your leave, send word for the mothers to gather here right away. It seems I need to sire more progeny that may not be utterly useless tools in the grand scheme of things, those that may actually carry the legacy of Alabalam across eons with me and not cause me a loss. Basilius Anane's figure only stopped briefly at this, her eyes radiating a sharp glow as she nodded once more. Understood. Take it easy. You aren't as young as you used to be, Father. With these words, she bowed and disappeared. On the throne at the head of the table, the Archon Basilius Alabalam sneered while devouring more fruits of existence. As a moment later, the figures of dazzling women began to appear in this space, in a frozen record lost in the eons of time. As Emperor Delbert, Noah's figure stared at the massive stature of a Decastes of extremity as his eyes began to burn with vermilion-colored flames. He wanted to do something. It was just a feeling he had in his mind, but he wanted to achieve it. And so he squeezed every ounce of power of his existence and directed it towards his distinction. The Weaver of Extremity peers into the weaving of a new subject before him. Tangled in barriers and authorities, the chosen target is Abidax of the legacy of Al-Abalam. His existence burned as tendrils of vermilion light jumped from the visage of Emperor Delbert and into the white Vitalis Decastes of extremity. The record remained frozen as there seemed to be heavy friction and interferences. Yet Noah's will had grown to such an extent within the 7th gradation of extremity that it was just enough to enter. The weavings of this entity before him started to become clear. The Weaver of Extremity has unearthed and stepped into the past weaving of existence of Abidax of the legacy of Al-Abalam. The synchrony percentage is of low tier. The weavings of the life, memories, concepts, and extremes of Abidax become prevalent to you at a small, extremely low level. Noah's will felt like a liquid mass that spread rapidly to fill up the vessel that was Abidax, and he felt as if he was becoming an entirely different form of existence. As if the physiology and makeup of who he was now was entirely different from what he always knew. You are grasping the weaving of Abidax. The first thing he felt were heavy emotions of superiority and pride, of unblemished confidence and certainty. And then, information began to flow alongside it. Abidax, as seen and understood by the weavings of the current record, was a Decastes of extremity that had recently awakened from a state of existential hibernation, his existence once more becoming filled with the unfathomable light of the fruit of existence. Chapter 2893, Decastes. The flow of information was a wondrous one. It was something Noah should in no way have access to, and yet here he was. He was reading the intricacies of the weavings of the Decastes of extremity, particularly one who had recently left a state of hibernation after being injected with the light of something known as the fruit of existence. The fruit of existence. Noah's mind found itself unmistakably attracted to the weavings of such a thing as he sought to understand it. But the flow of information was there, even though it was jumbled. It was all because of the low-tier synchrony, because Noah's capabilities in understanding the weaving were barely at the first metamorphosis, and the target he selected was at an extremely high place. So Noah released waves of calmness as he focused on the weavings of the origin of this being. The Weaver of Extremity gazes into the weavings of a Vitalis Decastes of extremity, beginning to peel apart the veiled layers of mystery. Different scenes flashed in Noah's mind. As if it were a long-lost dream, blurry images and scenes began to rise in his mind. He'd dream of a place within the depths of the aeonic annals of extremity. Nay, even saying the depths was doing it a disservice, as it was located towards what could be considered the very heart of the annals of extremity. Here, Vitalis and Vacuous intersected. Here, all existential extremity authorities seemed to intersect. And the dream of this place instantly became clear to Noah as if he had forgotten it this whole time. The Archeos Vitalis Pylos. A booming intent leaked from him as his existence trembled. He felt like he had nearly lost himself as he blinked, his eyes truly opening as Abidax at this moment as his pupils saw a shocking scene. He felt his pupils on the wings, the singular ones on the chest and face, and he saw that his vision was one that saw reality drastically different from others. He saw reality in terms of vibrations of intents, their intermixing and gravitational forces around each other. And through his authority, He could traverse across such intents, or even express his will through them, and he could voice something out without needing to move his lips, as he simply had to emanate his intent outwards and allow it to dance on the countless vibrations of intents that made up the surrounding reality. Noah had to see this scene before he affirmed that yes, he was currently Abidax, but at the same time, I am the extremity of quintessence. His intent came from the visage of a Vitalis Decastus as he moved his hands feely and even flapped the butterfly like wings. After that, after affirming who he was and not running the risk of losing his identity, he continued to peer deeper into the weavings of this being he now became. He saw the Archeos Vitalis Pylos in jumbled memories. He remembered that he, a Decastus of extremity, was not a lone being, nor was he a unique being. What he was and always is could be defined by the distinction of a soldier of nothing else but the legacy of Al-Abalam. There were many like him, as their numbers did not stop in the mere hundreds or thousands. They reached fuck. Noah cursed out within his own will as this piece of information came in. Millions. Their number was in the millions. But there was a saving grace. The vast number of Decastas of extremity, even though there were many, the vast majority were in a state of existential hibernation. Their very existence was in a state of dormancy, as they were unique entities who were produced in ways that even they themselves were not privy to. When Abidax came to, it was the first time he was awoken from existential hibernation, as his mind held a single thing. Complete fealty to the legacy of Al-Abalam, those who woke it from its slumber. Noah's will burned with vermilion-colored flames as he uttered out a single word that arose from the blurry memories. Basilius, those he couldn't even gaze at, the ones above extremity. In the hazy memories of Abidax, Noah felt great rents and fealty from its emotions that caused a sense of distaste within his own mind. But he continued to delve deeper into the weavings of this being. It was awoken from existential hibernation by none other than the light of a fruit of existence. A dozen other Decastes around him at that time also being woken up as they rose from the ranks of hundreds of thousands of hibernating Decastes in the depths of the Archeos Vitalis Pylos that were stretching into the distance. Its job was a simple one: to constantly monitor and keep track of the unfolding records and existence of Vitalis. They were given the authority of how to act and what to do in different possibilities, with many means available to them when it came to overseeing the seeds under their control. When Noah came to this point, his distaste turned into revulsion and burning tyranny of anger as he closely experienced how the Decastes of extremity saw him and all the others. They saw them as less than nothing. Insects to observe, as their only use was furthering Vitalis itself and increasing the rate of extraction of nothing else but the fruit of existence. Noah uttered out the name of a thing that continued to come up again and again. The fruit that the Basilius of Al-Abalam extracted from the records being built in all of Vitalis. The records that he made. The records of extremes in existence. Their weavings were what generated the necessary power for the bountiful extraction of the fruits of existence. And the ones benefiting from all of this were none other than the Basilius of Al-Abalam. Their true number was unknown, as in the blurry memories of the records of Abidax, he had only met them a few times. Each one seemed insurmountable, but there were those who seemed even grander than all others. Royal in nature and grand in their majesty, the Decastus Abidax remembered one Basilius in particular who seemed involved in everything that occurred within the Archeos Vitalis Pylos. What was her name? What was her face? Chapter 2894, Decastus, a sect. Noah felt his existence burning with vermilion flames as he was pulling out the weavings of records and information he should have no access to, but he seemed to have reached a shocking precipice of attaining something crucial as he pushed on. From the blurry memories of Abidax, he was pulling on the weavings of a key figure that moved around the Archeos Vitalis Pylos. Feminine in nature and grand in stature, she was whom? The weaving of a bodax trembled as cracks spread on its body, but Noah persevered and continued, and gradually a hazy image was rising before his eyes. Silver white hair, dazzling white eyes, a commanding authority unlike other Basilius they came across. This was Basilius Anani. Yes, Basilius Anani, the progeny of... The moment Noah arrived here, His senses instantly blared, as in the next moment, at the fastest possible speed he could muster, he left the depths of the weavings of Abodax he was searching in. His authority as the weaver of extremity blared as he went further to leave the weavings of Emperor Delbert entirely, his authority erasing his traces and wiping out anything there was about him. This was because at this moment, he was feeling an unprecedented sense of danger, and he was quickly retreating across the interminable weavings of countless records, seeking to take back the portion of his will and existence that was being used to peer into the weavings of Emperor Delbert, as even during the time he wanted to complete this action. An aurum brilliance burned within him, along with a golden brilliance of oraculum, as he abandoned this idea as well. This part of him could not return to his main body. Instead, this part of his existence disappeared even further into the weavings of records, the light of apocalypse beginning to shine around it, as while reinforced by quintessence, infinity, tyranny, and the protagonist, Noah began to bring an end to this part of him entirely. This was because he had gazed somewhere far too high for him at this moment. And even as he was doing all of this, it still didn't feel like he was doing enough, as a heavy sense of danger still remained. In the Archeos Vitalis Pylos, in the depths of a massive white circular structure, the visage of Basilius Anine had her hands behind her back as she looked into a glass aquarium that held thousands of cosmos within it, and the dazzling flow of multiple fruits of existence could be seen alongside them. She seemed to be thinking of too many things when all of a sudden her gaze flickered with brilliance and surprise as her body instantly erupted with light, and a part of her will disappearing somewhere. In the aquarium, hundreds of fruits of existence faded alongside a part of her, as this scene was not unique to her. A nanosecond after her, just a small moment later, in the depths of the Archeos Vitalis Pylos, atop a marbled floor, the Archon Basilius Alabalum was getting undressed when all of a sudden his brows rose. Someone is even thinking about trying to grasp a part of my weavings? Just thinking about the action. The action itself wasn't even done, but his profound weavings were able to sense it instantly as his translucent pupils flashed with brilliance. From a record in the depths of Vitalis? Is it the corrupted seed that began all of this? Multiple thoughts flashed in his mind in an instant, as on the cast table behind him, a few thousand fruits of existence flashed as the weavings of a part of his soul disappeared somewhere. Did you just inadvertently step into a trap, little seed? Let's see if this can be ended here. His gaze was deep. To keep things functioning, and as they were, restrictions stopped him and the Basilius below him from freely descending unto the lands of Vitalis and Vacuous. But for a cost, taking a part of his will into the weavings of a record was possible. And he did just that at this moment, as not even a nanosecond had passed since he felt someone thinking of probing a part of his weavings to him taking action. They wouldn't be able to run away, and even if they did, he would trace the weaving of their records and find out where they ran towards. Boom! Existential extremity authority flashed chaotically as the white glow of Vitalis was prominent. But it wasn't the only one. There was also a silver glow of another existential extremity authority. It was not Vitalis. It was something the legacy of Alabalum held before they even came to these lands. Basilius Anine moved fast. Her thoughts were her own, as, while she utilized a shocking amount of authority and a significant amount of her wealth for a small portion of her will to go towards the records where her weavings had been discerned, she also caused these very same weavings to turn chaotic and be filled with instability. She made it so that it would be all that much harder for any others to traverse across these records. Within the span of an instant, her vision stepped into a chaotic weaving of a record as she saw a grand castle, the visage of a seed from a long time past, and a decastas of extremity. But the source of the one who was peering into her weaving wasn't here, or it was apt to say, they were rapidly pulling away. Her authority moved rapidly as she followed the source and came to gaze upon something in the far reaches of nearby weavings of records, something about to entirely disappear, as the source was decisively wiping out their very own existence. But Basilius Anane was able to stare at them, at him, and as she stared at him, she knew that he also stared back at her sternly, At this moment in time, Basilius Anine could have chosen to do many things. With a 50% chance, she could make a move and possibly anchor the existence of this being here before she tracked down his origin. There was another 50% chance that even if she did so, his existence that was about to be extinguished would just slip past her grasp. All of these possibilities flashed by in the span of an instant as a terrifying light passed in Basilius Anine's eyes, and she instead made another choice. Her authority erupted as the surrounding weaving became even more chaotic, records becoming mixed up on records, weavings becoming layered upon weavings. Her lips arched into a smile as between the gaps of weaving of chaotic records, she kept her gaze interlocked with the will of an entity about to disappear. And the moment it entirely faded, boom! Another will, one even more terrifying than Basilius Anine's, descended onto this weaving of chaotic records. Chapter 2895, Momentum. Why had she spent so much to send part of her will to descend, only to stop by staring at the target far away from her? Only to mask and further cause him to be hard to find, to the extent that her actions on the way here and what she just did made it so that when a more terrifying will descended, it came just an instant after the traces of the insurgent entirely disappeared. This terrifying will was only able to see a stern expression on the manifested will of Basilius Anine, as if she was speedily reaching out ahead, only for her face to show immense frustration as it seemed something slipped right past her. Fuck! A low curse of anger escaped her lips as she looked up to see the cold gaze of her father. Daughter, your senses seem to have become even sharper, and this insurgent seems to be very capable. His eyes flashed with a chilling light as he gazed all around. He was a mere manifestation of a small part of himself, and yet the moment he arrived, the flow and weaving of all records ceased and stalled. The flow of records was obscured and turned chaotic, with his response being far too quick. You didn't manage to catch even a glimpse of him? A glimpse alone would have allowed many things. With a gaze and clear pupils that caused Basilius Anine to feel a heavy pressure, his will spread out to cover every single weaving nearby. Basilius Anine bowed down with a hint of regret and anger as she replied. My arrival was an instant after the insurgent extinguished his very own existence. He reacted too quickly. There are many things we could learn about his existential extremity authorities should we manage to catch him before the utilization of the Codex of Extremity. Her words contained a hint of regret as the Archon Basilius al-Abalam listened silently. He gazed at the chaotic weavings of records in the surroundings as he replied with a cold gaze. Many instances have come and gone across the eons in different lands where the seeds managed to expand. Existential extremity authorities, whether they were allowed to experimentally or not. None have managed to even become crucial points of studies to gain anything. Most are mere imitations of the existential extremity authorities of the lands they're in. Others don't have the breadth or capacity to come anywhere close. His gaze was chilling as he looked around the chaotic weavings, his words continuing. No, the authorities of this corrupted seed are not the main cause of his unique capabilities. They are far too young for that. All existential extremity authorities need time to grow, need seeds to grow. It's likely that this insurgent stumbled upon a tool, maybe even a budding existential treasure that was just born in the weavings of these lands. Basilius Anine paused at such words as her eyes flashed sharply. Perhaps, but it truly is a waste. I spend a significant amount of fruits of existence for the smallest part of my will to arrive here. Father must have spent even more. It wasn't even the lands of Vitalis or Vacuous themselves. Mere records of past weavings had wasted this many resources, as this was why the utilization of decastas of extremity was so crucial when it came to managing these lands. No matter. The Archon Basilius al-Abalam waved his hands dismissively as his figure began to disappear. If the insurgent has truly stumbled on an existential treasure, I can reclaim it after the utilization of the Codex of Extremity to restart everything. I can already feel the stench of Ignatius drawing near. With him in the picture, things can advance that much quicker. Whap! The moment he finished his words, he disappeared. Basilius Anine was the only one left behind amidst the chaotic swirls of weavings of records, her expression becoming composed and calm as she gazed around her. Noah Osmont, just what is it that you have? A grandiose and yet simple enough of a question. At this moment in time, it held no answer. Basilius Anaine breathed in the surrounding weavings of chaos as she closed her eyes, her thoughts only known to her as this time she didn't even express them in her intent. If you can survive that, maybe then you will be something problematic enough to make way for my ambition. But before that, everything is but a dream. A dream. A grand and impossible dream. Basilius Anaine of Al-Abalam knew the improbability of this dream more than anyone, but she never gave up on it even as eons passed. She planned. She waited. She moved when existence felt the need to. And now, she would wait some more. Boom! The very infinite hyperversal havens shook with tremors and fervor as its authority reinforced and masked everything, further retreating into waves of paradoxical obscurities just as a precaution. At the same time, Noah's main body showed eyes that were flowing with golden blood as a part of his line. Existence was truly extinguished, and it was done by none other than his own extreme. The extremity of apocalypse has grasped the quintessence of its extreme after achieving what it truly stands for on itself. The extremity of apocalypse destroyed a part of itself. Noah destroyed a part of himself, and how could one not grasp the extreme of something to a critical level when they experienced it so closely? The extremity of apocalypse takes steps ever close to the existential level, a boon from a possible calamity. Yet even amidst all of it, Noah's gaze was still stern. He remembered the gaze of the entity he had seen in the weavings of the decastes of extremity closely, the eyes of the one he had known to be called Basilius Anaine. At a critical juncture on immense possibilities of danger, she actually didn't make a move against him, and instead further obscured the weavings of the surrounding records to further delay the descent of the truly cataclysmic entity that was coming. The one that even now Noah could not even think about peering into the identity of. Such a thing caused his existence to burn with rageful tyranny. But quintessence reined everything in. The protagonist calmed all raging thoughts, and infinity reminded that there were still endless possibilities. Chapter 2896. Momentum. 2 deep breaths left his existence as he slowed everything down. He had made an uncountable number of gains in an extremely short period of time. He was just successful in taking 1/100th of both vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains, including portions of lands he couldn't even enter yet. He also stole what the Basilius of Al-Abalam and Ignatius considered seeds that were critical to the extraction of fruits of existence. He did all of this in the span of minutes. The Basilius, his enemies, had lived for countless eons. Their power was too great. What they held was still too mysterious. After making all of these recent gains, Noah now needed time to swallow everything and consolidate his power. Consolidate all of the knowledge he had gained. With the most critical being, what do you think of the fruit of existence? His voice echoed out towards the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven. Her figure was surrounded by blazing brilliance at this moment, as this construct assimilated a great deal of gains. Her voice was serene and filled with possibilities as she spoke. It's likely that when an existential extremity authority reaches a certain level, this authority itself begins to produce something. Call it a byproduct, if you will. This should be the fruit of existence. The more power an existential extremity authority generates, the more this byproduct can be obtained. Its uses alone seem terrific, as the legacies of Al-Abalam and Ignatius are intent on extracting these fruits alone over the eons. A byproduct. But it was one that every single entity wanted and sought, as its uses were unfathomable. Noah's eyes were stern and blazing with vermilion-colored brilliance, as he voiced out again while gazing out into the multicolored authorities around him. Can you feel how close we are to manifesting such byproducts ourselves? Wah! A shocking question and assertion. Compared to vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains that had been around for untold eons, the infinite hyperversal haven was young, interminably young. But what it held was now 4 existential extremity authorities coursing through it, in addition to its founding concepts having a semblance of such a level too. It was young, yes, but it had things that the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains couldn't even begin to imagine. And now, With the advent of entities of the 7th and 8th gradation of extremity entering these lands, how much more refinement and power would Noah's existential extremity authority attain? How close would the infinite hyperversal haven come? No words left the manifestation of the infinite hyperversal haven at Noah's question as she seemed to be pondering. She was above all else a logical construct. She wouldn't give empty words or promises, as currently, she didn't have enough data to make a factual statement regarding this issue. Noah saw this reality as he nodded while waving his hands. We will find out in due time. Consolidate the recent gains while I carefully filter through the information regarding the Basilius of Alabalim and Ignatius. At the same time, I will go see to the guests. The guests. The moment Noah brought up these entities, his figure disappeared from this enclosed domain. At the same time, across the infinite hyperversal haven, powerful entities, primogenitors and legends who only had their names passed down over the eons in Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains, they actually appeared in a new land filled with unfathomable wonder. Near the Prana Alethean haven, rotating around the massive infinity-shaped extremity vein, the visage of the Bard of Vitalis could be seen in his monkey-like form as a flute was on his hands and lips, a tune of wonder and new beginnings emanating from it while he gazed at all the new structures around them. A distance away, the burly and muscular figure of the primogenitor of steel could also be seen as reality distorted around him. There were many others, but at this moment, all of these new entrants felt the distortion of space around them as they all disappeared from where they stood and were taken somewhere else entirely. When their wills adjusted again, the auras of a few hundred beings could be felt appearing en masse, as most were the new entrants far advanced in the gradations of extremity. But there were also the figures of Sargon, Ishtar, and the Sumerian architect, in addition to Noah's closest people. His sun, burning with a light of gold and vermilion grandeur, stood in front of the Emperor Penguin, Dr. Hall, Kazuhiko, and many other prominent figures of the infinite hyperversal haven as they all appeared, within the veiled structure that was the Alchemy Hall. The Alchemy Hall where mountains of planolith crystallis were being produced. They appeared in a section of the Alchemy Hall where the floor was formed of a crystalline purple-blue radiance, with the figures of those teleported here being at the very center as around them. Glistening crystalline circular objects could be seen piling up into mountains. Some even rolled at the bottom of their feet, as when their wills looked around, they were shocked to find an overabundance of a few thousand low-grade planolith crystallos around them, as well as tens of thousands of middle-grade planolith crystallos that made up the vast majority, extending into dunes of mountains. Some were purple in color, others were so blue they looked like they contained endless seas within them, and some were colorless while radiating a shocking brilliance. Without a doubt, all of them emanated an aura of existential extremity authorities, as the spreading wills of all entities here came to find that on top of the largest mountain of middle-grade planolith crystallus, there was the renowned figure of the entity who had brought them all here sitting atop such a mountain. He sat down freely with his hands over his knees gloriously, his eyes filled with shocking luminosity as he gazed at the past primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains. Chapter 2897, Momentum. 3. All eyes were on him. After all, how could they not be? He sat atop the tallest mountain, holding tens of thousands of middle-grade planolith crystallos of existential extremity authorities, and stared down at entities, standing proudly at the 7th and 8th gradation of extremity. His closest people were also present, as many of them had shining eyes while staring at the dazzling planolith crystallis around them. But nobody leaned down to pick up even a single one as they all gazed towards the visage of Noah. The extremity of quintessence, the extremity of tyranny, the most recent honored one. The voice of the primogenitor of steel was a booming one, and a heavy one, as complex emotions were seen in the eyes of this burly figure. To him and many others, they held an intricate history with Vitalis or vacuous hyperversal domains. It was where he was born in, and in their later stages of life, as they crossed the gradations of extremity, they came to find that they lived in lands where they had to cower and hide from the gazes of others. from the gazes of the ones above extremity. And most crucial of all, none of them could dream of the ninth gradation of extremity. None of them could dream of even exceeding it. All of these were far and distant dreams, as on this day, at this moment, these dreams came alive again. Not just the primogenitor of steel, but many entities here wanted to speak up and confirm if they were truly free of the influence of the ones above extremity that they had to hide from. Steel was even more melancholic, as he wanted to share this moment with an old friend, his will gazing around the brilliance in the surroundings, but he couldn't see the one he was looking for. His eyes turned somber as he asked the figure sitting atop a mountain of planolith crystallos in the distance. There are many things to be said, but I am curious about the whereabouts of Caragalus. Was he also able to? The words of Steel trailed off as what they were asking was clear. And yet, when it came to receiving an answer, the figure of the extremity of quintessence simply waved his hands and showed an illusory scene. A scene of none other than the man in question, about to be ripped apart by the decastas of extremity, his will and everything about him reaching out towards Noah when he reached no aid. The pupils of the past primogenitors sharpened at such a scene as in the next moment, they saw all emotion fade away from the visage of Caragalus as moments later, he transformed to become a decastes of extremity. These are our enemies. The voice of the extremity of quintessence rang out right after this heavy scene. The figure of the primogenitor of steel had an ashen expression as his eyes briefly closed, many thoughts crossing his mind. Was that truly Caragalus? Was he killed and his place taken? Was his friend still alive? There was an overabundance of questions with no answers. But the voice of the extremity of quintessence continued. The enemies are the dicastes of extremity, but they are just soldiers of the legacies that sit above the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains. Two legacies that, with your own strength and understanding of the weavings of records, existence, and extremity, I find it wise to not even tell you. The eyes of Steel and other primogenitors buzzed. The Cimmerian architect watched on with a burning glimmer of light as Noah continued. Moments ago, I nearly placed myself in peril just by trying to grasp the weavings of these entities you all called the ones above extremity. If you all start knowing their identities and try peering into it, a similar peril may follow us all as for now. Understand that to them, you are mere seeds, workers they can use and discard when they wish, as you've seen over the eons with the deaths of any entity stepping on the ninth gradation of extremity, or anyone seeking to expand an existential extremity authority. Seeds! Workers! These words buzzed in the minds of these prideful and powerful entities as at this time, the sad melody of a symphony began to play. Noah briefly turned his head towards the Bard of Vitalis before he continued calmly. The crux of everything is existential extremity authorities. Vitalis and Vacuous benefited and grew more refined from you all and all others under those lands following this extreme, and the ones above extremity benefited the most from this. I've broken the shackles of gazes and control they had on you all before, but things are not resolved. We are still within the aeonic annals of extremity, still within Vitalis and Vacuous. And we need the strength to stand against beings that have exceeded extremity, an impossible task. The primogenitor of flames heard this as his pupils blazed. The primogenitor of dust sighed as she looked at the intent around others. Henry and all of Noah's prominent entities watched on calmly as his words continued to reverberate with glory. We do not have that strength. Wah! The words were akin to a hammer that struck the hearts of all. A hammer that could rouse fear among many other emotions. And yet the extremity of quintessence did not wait long before continuing. What we have is the potential of such strength, that potential. He paused while moving his eyes from the gaze of all-powerful primogenitors here, his hand coming to hold a dazzling blue planolith crystallos. That potential is why I sit where I sit. It all comes back to existential extremity authorities. So long as these are strong enough, there lies the potential to stand against even the ones above extremity. There lies a pathway for even us to exceed extremity. Now I have here multiple existential extremity authorities I've managed to expand. With them I plan to stand against the immovable force above us. You all embarking on these authorities will strengthen them and contribute to this fight. Or you can even try to elevate your own extremes to the existential level. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is that these are the only weapons capable of defending us. And after today's actions, we have thoroughly enraged the ones above extremity. Chapter 2898. Momentum. A fourth. Words filled with the stark reality echoed out. Words that were not minced even by a little. Noah gazed at his people and all others here as he continued. Now, they will retaliate against what they consider a rebellion of insects that dared to think too highly of themselves. And this retaliation of theirs, I do not fully know just how deadly it will be, as I can only personally prepare. The words were grim ones, but they were the truth. At this moment in time, Noah had to let them all see the truth, as the power of the Basilius of Al-Abalim and Ignatius was truly too mighty. You all are already powerful in your own right. You've lived an uncountable number of years as you have your own pride. Pride, power, extremes, whatever it is you believe in, utilize it towards our potential to survive against the ones above extremity, as if we aren't successful in this. The will to even make the choice will no longer exist. Just like all the erased records in existence of past honored ones, past entities that simply crossed the ire of the Dicastes and those above them, we will all be ground down to nothingness. The symphony playing in the background reached a precipice, as at this moment, the visage of the Bard of Vitalis rose his monkey-like head. He retained his white fur as the abrupt end of his paramount symphony brought a heavy conclusion to the monologue of the extremity of quintessence. And this entity proceeded to speak up in such a heavy atmosphere where a single existence had been dominating thus far. The weavings of future symphonies come to me before the reality itself unfolds. He began simply as Noah's eyes came to land on him. The primogenitors of Vacuus and Vitalis also came to hone their wills onto his majestic monkey-like visage as he continued. Through the weavings of symphonies, I can get a sense of the coming future, whether it is bright, whether it is dark. His words caused many eyes to turn somber. Was the Bard of Vitalis about to state how dark and abysmal the symphony of the coming future was? Was he about to tell them what a somber and sad tune was in store for them? These were the questions they asked themselves, but the reply of the Bard of Vitalis, who had his eyes gazing forward in a dazed and lost expression, stated, "There is no symphony. Boom! Nothing bright, nothing dark, just nothing. No future whatsoever." The words that came out were much worse than any of them could have hoped. Even Noah's gaze turned stern as he came to lock on to the Bard of Vitalis. But the entity didn't leave them here as he continued. At least, this is what lies in store with the state of the current reality. If things were to change, if we can grasp any of that and elevate it. The Bard of Vitalis pointed towards the mountains of existential planalith crystallis all around them, towards the existential extremity authorities they represented. Then maybe, just maybe, there may be a tune of the future again. For that, my peers, I ask you to join me in leaving behind any prejudice and pride. I ask you to embark and elevate these existential extremity authorities before us as likely. They may just be the thing standing between us and the complete cessation of existence. The Bard of Vitalis made a plea, and the other primogenitors couldn't help but listen, in a unique junction of records and weavings between Vitalis and Vacuus. In a place very few entities could never even dream of entering, auroras of black and white mixed massive pillars of Vitalis and Vacuus, hyperversal authorities raged in the surroundings. This was a place that could be reached from specified locations within the Archeos Vitalis Pylos or Archeos Vacuus Pylos. And currently, there were two figures that had appeared together at this moment. A man and a woman, and yet they seemed much more than that, as the man seemed titanic in aura and majesty, his dark eyes radiating a sense of awe and power that very few could match. He was adorned in an obsidian violet robe that radiated gloriousness, with nothing being more glorious than his head, which was entirely bald and shining with brilliance. It only added to his stature as an Aeonic emperor from ancient times, as beside him was his partner, one whose beauty was unprecedented, as her dark hair flowed past her shoulders, her pupils sharp as she spoke words that only her partner, the Archon Basilius Ignatius, could hear. Al-Abalem holds control of the Codex of Extremity for these lands, yes. But it may be possible for this authority to change depending on how things unfold after this. If his tributes fall off, or the cost to do that is much higher, it may just change ownership. Thereafter, Ignatius can begin enjoying the same eons of wealth as these white hats. The words were succinct and filled with power, as beside her, the visage of Archon Basilius Ignatius was calm, as if anything could happen, and he would remain an immovable mountain. His thoughts were his own, as at this moment, his eyes sharpened and looked in the distance as the visage of another entity gradually materialized. He wasn't alone, as beside him, the figure of a young woman filled with unconventional beauty also came along. It was Archon Basilius Alabalum and his second in command, Basileus Anain. His gaze was filled with calm, as there was a sense of repulsion in his eyes that he purposefully left open to be observed. We've been gathered here again, though this time under less than preferred circumstances. With a deep voice filled with power, the Archon Basilius Alabalum spoke towards the Archon Basilius Ignatius. They were gathered here today for a single reason, and a single reason alone: to come to an agreement regarding the lands they oversaw, to come to an agreement to erase everything within it, and to start things over. Chapter 2899, Momentum. 5. A meeting of insurmountable importance. This was exactly what was occurring at this moment in time as the Archon Basilius Alabalum and Archon Basilius Ignatius stared at each other. Each of their bodies radiated a shocking amount of brilliance and majesty, as the meeting of these beings was not a normal one. They were rulers of their legacies. They were entities who stood atop domains other beings could only dream of. They were existences with immense power and wealth, as the names of their legacies were etched across uncountable eons. When they met, something critical would occur thereafter. The shining bald head of the Archon Basilius Ignatius, draped in black and violet, glinted with even grander brilliance as he spoke. We seem to have allowed a disease to fester to such an extent that it has now jumped onto many prominent seeds. His words were light and full of ease as towards them, Archon Basilius Alabalum merely nodded with a reply. Yes, it may be a first for us while managing these lands, but these things happen. Now, we don't need to allow the disease to fester even more, as I can initiate that with the Codex of Extremity. We each just have to bear the cost, but... The eyes of Archon Basilius Alabalum shone as he continued with a level of authority. Since the usage of the Codex of Extremity falls under my heel, I will be gracious enough to provide 60% of the required fruits of existence. The brows of even Basilius Anain arose at such words, not to mention Archon Basilius Ignatius and the entity beside him. Since when has Archon Basilius Alabalum been such a gracious being? Such a question arose as every move of entities of their level was measured and filled with purpose, and they couldn't yet see why the Archon would take a greater loss than what he already had to currently pay. But no answer came as faced with his stoicism. Archon Basilius Ignatius simply nodded while replying. All right, let us proceed with enacting that. Many of those who spoke about it didn't prefer to call it by its name, as it was truly a distasteful thing. But it was also a necessary thing, something to bring it all to an end and start anew. It was Moore's Apocalypsis. Archon Basilius Alabalum spoke sufficiently as the surroundings trembled at the mere mention of it. Moore's Apocalypsis. The eyes of Basilius Anain turned sharp at these words, and their sheer gravity as Archon Basilius Alabalum continued. After its activation, many things will not be the same as within 9 days. All seeds within the gradations of extremity shall have everything of their weavings of records, existence, and history embraced. All seeds that ever had at any point in time been recorded in the Codex of Extremity shall face this as none can escape. Once initiated, the absolute restrictions on us will become utterly impossible to break, as we won't be able to influence any of the lands below us by any margin. We won't be able to know what happened, nor will we be able to even gaze at the authority unleashed by the Codex of Extremity. But will we really need to? Wah! He asked a question at the end, and yet it didn't need to be answered, because within 9 days, Moore's Apocalypsis would occur. They all knew this. The first day, all those within the first gradation of extremity and below would perish. For the seeds of the Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains, this was a day that they would perish in the largest amounts. On the second day, all those within the second gradation of extremity would perish. This would go on as, for these lands, more apocalypsis will be done on the eighth day. At that time, we should see a new land open up before us, as the day after Moore's apocalypsis is finished. The absolute restrictions will be at their lowest. We could appear with our main bodies unfettered in the Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains as we please to observe the start of a new eon, a new page on the Codex of Extremity. A terrifying set of words were strung together, ones that did not bode well for the existences within the aeonic annals of Extremity, ones that were definitively a death sentence for countless masses. Let's get started. With a brilliant light, these beings began to move to enact something as terrifying as Moore's apocalypsis, in the infinite hyperversal haven. Within a section of the alchemy hall that held mountains of planolith crystallos and some of the most powerful entities to have come out of vacuous and vitalist hyperversal domains. After the stark words of the Bard of Vitalis, the primogenitor of steel gazed around the faces of others here as with a blinding light of brilliance, he spoke. Since things have naturally come to this, we will contribute as needed. But when it comes to the existential extremity authorities here, we know nothing of them. How about a display? A display. What did the primogenitor of steel mean by this? The visage of Noah remained seated atop the mountain of planolith crystallos silently as he locked his gaze onto Steel, who stared right back at him. By display, how about a spar against me or someone else of your choosing to express what the existential extremity authorities around us signify? Then we can all easily make a choice thereafter. A spar against one of the shocking legends of Vitalis, or even other legends from the domains. It was a natural progression for these truly powerful beings, as they had already seen the shocking capabilities and machinations of this existence before them, when he whisked them away from the decastes of extremity. Now they wanted a glimpse of the existential extremity authorities themselves. And for this spar, would the extremity of quintessence truly fight against someone at the 8th gradation of extremity, when they all knew he achieved his status as an honored one and attained extremity minutes ago? Chapter 2900. Momentum 6. Minutes after he attained extremity. One would be called insane if they really stated before that such an entity could even put up a fight against someone at the 8th gradation of extremity. But the extremity of quintessence was different. He had in his accolades the capability of escaping from decastes of extremity and being the first honored one to actually expand not just one concept to the existential level, but from what they could see, it was 3. Naturally, the guidelines regarding him were different. Even now, potent waves of power at the 7th gradation of extremity could be felt from him. 7th! Even this was astounding enough, but there were dozens of entities from the past primogenitors here who were also at this level. And there were a few terrifying auras like the primogenitor of steel who stood at the 8th gradation. Would a unique entity such as the extremity of quintessence be able to catch up to the eons of work that these primogenitors had put in? The Bard of Vitalis watched on calmly as a guitar appeared in his hands, a low and unbothered melody beginning to play out. Ishtar and Sargon watched on with sharp eyes as they wondered just how vast the difference would be. The Sumerian architect, the seer of Sema, Svetlana, daughter of hatred, Ayame, Erickson, and many other prominent figures watched on with high expectations. Meanwhile, the extremity of nepotism smiled. They sought to measure his father. They sought to understand him. They would come to learn. He could feel the burning within his roiling blood. He could feel the intensity and quintessence. But when Noah actually replied, "A display is not an issue, but it would not be fair for me to take you on."
Oh,
Noah sat on the mountain of planolith crystallos as he told the primogenitor of steel that it wouldn't be fair. And before any guesses could be made as to why, it wouldn't be fair to let you face me alone. So how about you and all the past primogenitors of Vitalis and Vacuous come at me? Boom! The eyes of the primogenitors of steel, flame, dust, sword, bones, water, life, and death vibrated. The remaining primogenitors from Vacuous and Vitalis became stern at such words as there were a few hundred of them. Yet for the display of his existential extremity authorities, he said he would face them all here. He, against all the past primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains, absent those who didn't call out to be weaver of extremity, of course. But it was still a heavy moment as after acclimating to these words, Steele flashed a smile as his tan figure radiated a terrifying rusty silver glow, his white teeth clearly seen as he voiced out close to a bellow. Very well, we face the threat of death and cessation above us. We may as well go wild, even if just a little. The primogenitors gazed at each other. An agreement was formed in their eyes. They were all on the same boat currently, yes, but they held their pride. For eons, they held their positions, and today they would defend their positions. Waves of existential extremity authority descended at this moment as space began to distort once more. The figures of all entities here disappearing an instant later as space was shifted once more. The scene changed. From the alchemy hall, space distorted across the infinite hyperversal haven as the extremity vein blared with light at this moment. When the wills of primogenitors and the many vassals of the infinite hyperversal haven came to again, they found themselves in a grand domain. Expanding out to be the size of multiple cosmos, there was a fiery Apollyon-Alithian haven floating like a massive cosmic island, waterfalls of crimson gold essence falling off of it. Around it, thrones floating with a tyrannical purple hue as there were tens of thousands in number. This whole area seeming like a grand arena as these thrones circled this floating Alethian haven. On the throne that were for audiences, the figure of Henry, Emperor Penguin, Barbados, Adelaide, Cimmerian Architect, and many others could be seen. But they weren't alone. Hyperion could be seen. Enders of Extremity could be seen. Extras also permeated in the surroundings. The record of Oppenheimer. The record of Emperor Feng. A dazzling array of all the important powerhouses were gathered here today as they all knew they came at a critical point of their existence. And when all of these beings gazed at the whole landscape around them, they could see a distant, incandescent interior of a dazzling extremity vein. It meant that they were inside the extremity vein of the infinite hyperversal haven. Auroras of dazzling authorities and extremes swirled and flowed all around them as they seemed to be in a glorious ancient land built for battle. Atop the floating Apollyon-Alithian haven, Noah appeared above a trembling lava-filled mountain as the primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains appeared on other regions of this landmass, their bodies beginning to brim with power. Noah himself was adorned with a royal purple robe as existential extremity authorities began to swirl around him, his voice succinct as it echoed out. If any one of you can manage to land even a tendril of your authority on my body, you can have your pick of hundreds of middle-grade planolith crystallis of any existential extremity authority, or any assortment of middle-grade armaments of extremity. Hundreds of middle-grade planolith crystallos. Each one could start an entity on the path of that extreme, as the more they devoured, the more refined and powerful this authority became. The further they could increase the breadth of their existence, the higher they could climb across the gradations of extremity. His words rang out resonantly as above this region, like glittering stars, thousands of planolith crystallos and armaments of extremity appeared. They floated with glory and magnificence as on the seats of the audiences, the eyes of many vassals burned brightly. His words reverberated all around. A sense of awe permeated the surroundings as a moment later, from the audience thrones floating around the Apollyon-Alithian haven, multiple figures shot out. Henry, the son of the extremity of quintessence, was at the forefront as from another area, the daughter of hatred could be seen shooting out towards the arena. Emperor Feng shone with a record of profound destiny as he also shot out. Hyperion, the Cimmerian architect, Sargon, Ishtar, Emperor Penguin, Kazuhiko, and many more also followed, because the words of the extremity of quintessence were clear. If any one of you, he didn't specify or limit it to the primogenitors of Vitalis and Vacuous. He laid out possibilities for all those here as on this day. The major powerhouses of the infinite hyperversal haven all looked to challenge a single being. They all looked to challenge the extremity of quintessence. Chapter 29:01 Acceleration 1. Those who may not be familiar with Noah may make the assumption that maybe, just maybe, landing a mere tendril of authority on him would be achievable. The primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains currently had a similar mindset where surely, with dozens of entities at the 7th gradation of extremity, a few esteemed extremities on the 8th gradation, and the remaining hundreds in the 6th gradation and below, multiple of them should be able to land a tendril of authority on him. Likely, he made these conditions to make it easy for them to gain access to the planolith crystallis and accelerate their inclusion into his existential extremity authority. Likely. Many of them were also cautious and thinking that for an honored one like him, there actually might be a challenge here. Then, there were those who had lived with Noah. There was a group that didn't even move from their thrones. Adelaide, Barbados, Athena, Caitlin, Eowyn, all the queens of the infinite hyperversal haven didn't even make a move. Barbados shook her head while pointing to the rush of entities below as her voice rang out only amongst them. Look at them trying to do the impossible. The impossible. Through the extremity of harems, they received a portion of Noah's power across their existence. So they knew a fraction about the strength he held, and because they knew this, they didn't move a muscle. Besides, Little Fish has already secretly given me dozens of middle-grade planolith crystallos. Ha! Big sis Adelaide, you got a similar amount, right? She turned her gaze towards Adelaide, who towards her question, gave a mysterious smile. The smile instantly caused the gaze of Barbatos to change as she asked with sharp eyes. Sis Adelaide, how many planolith crystallos did Little Fish give you? The other queens raised their brows as they were now also interested since they had received loot from Noah automatically, but they hadn't thought to compare and see just how differently it was compared to others. Adelaide smiled brightly while replying, her blue hair waving serenely on her throne. Just enough, don't worry about these things, Sis Barbatos. She didn't say the number as her words caused the competitive spirit of all those in the surroundings to rise. Barbatos harumphed as she turned to look back toward Noah's glorious visage. She was his favorite, right? Her gaze went from him and into her own blessed chest and figure as she wondered. While the queens of the infinite hyperversal haven were on their own field, there were also other entities who knew Noah very closely. The Emperor Penguin, Kazuhiko, even his own son, they knew his power, but they couldn't bring themselves to not even try, as his words to include even them were intentional. He wanted them to see the gap. He wanted them to see just how far of a distance it was. So they jumped into the fray as what they held in their hearts was hope. Then, there were those like the daughter of hatred and Ayame, those like Erickson. They knew their own power. They knew that they would be nowhere close. But they had to try. Out of desperation for even higher heights, they had to try. They weren't alone as even the visage of the seer of Sema moved, her voice barely discernible. Making these old bones put in the work. Whom? Blaring authorities erupted. There were too many moving pieces as on the hellish battlefield of the Apollyon Alethian Haven, some beings should shine more than others. From the primogenitors, Steel's visage turned robust as all reality surrounding him began to take on a bronze glow. In the far distance, the visage of Commander Feng, the visage of Emperor Feng could be seen as his body pulsed with tendrils of destiny. After rushing into the arena of the Apollyon Alethian Haven, threads of destiny flowed from him and into the minds of multiple entities. Hyperion heard his voice. The devilish Time Unveiler heard his voice. Sargon, Ishtar, and Elodie heard his voice. Dozens of Enders of Extremity heard his voice. In the weaving of this impossible task, I have a plan. Even this astounding commander knew it was an impossible task, as he tried to weave together interminable waves of destiny. His intents weaved out and went to multiple beings, and soon after, they melded into the background of the arena as they didn't make the first move, allowing the chaos to unfold as the past primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains struck out. And none were more brilliant than the primogenitor of steel at the 8th gradation of extremity. A rusty glow of silver steel was already spreading all around him as his own visage took a similar hue, and it had enlarged to a ridiculous extent while only growing larger. Gradually, the rusty silver glow he emanated that altered the surrounding reality truly seemed to be turning the weavings of all nearby records under the banner of steel. and tendrils of this authority continued to spread outwards as this entity uttered out. Living armory. His enlarged body shone as dozens of armaments of extremity appeared around it. Most were pristine and glorious-looking, middle-grade armaments of extremity. As the moment they appeared, they turned into streams of light that surged into his body, as if they were rising with him, as if they were becoming one. Multiple armaments of extremity fused into his already mighty figure as his body alone had grown to be 100 times larger than all others here. Dazzling tendrils of extremity authority that truly represented steel, distorting everything, as in such a state. This primogenitor let the intent of his extreme target the extremity of quintessence. He was one of the more flashy and powerful ones. But along with him, the extremes of all other primogenitors also flowed to attack Noah. Life, death, water, sword, dust. Multiple different concepts flowed one after another as their intent and desire sought to make themselves stand out even against this honored one they were targeting. Chapter 29:02, Acceleration 2. An endless sea formed. Innumerable waves of stellar ash and dust flowed, and dazzling illusory sword radiances littered the fiery flows of the Apollyon Alithian haven. And yet the being that these extremes were targeting gazed at all of this coldly. For him, there was no future of a struggle or a suspenseful fight. All he saw was utter and complete domination. To display his existential extremity authorities, they could only be displayed with complete dominance against all other extremes. And so, without even moving a muscle, Noah gazed at the hundreds of powerful entities in the gradations of extremity coming towards him as he uttered out coldly, existential hyperversal embodiment. He cast the skill ushered forth by the extremity of skill trees, and the target of his embodiment caused a glorious colorless brilliance to flash from him. It was none other than quintessence. The moment the three words were uttered, the space above flickered. Below the planolith crystallos and armaments of extremity that littered the skies like stars, colorless hyperversal existential extremity authority gathered as in the next moment, an illusory pair of eyes manifested. The eyes followed the curvature of an infinity symbol as each one held 9 rotating pupils, both of them radiating glory as it felt like the eyes of the extremity of quintessence had appeared far above the battlefield and were gazing at everything. And the eyes blinked. Whap! A colorless glow flashed and passed over everything in this Apollyon Alithian haven as a moment later. All the weavings of authorities that are not quintessential shall henceforth be stopped. The glorious rusty glow of silver disappeared. The visage of the primogenitor of steel began to shrink as his eyes trembled in shock and stupor. Dazzling sword lights faded as an endlessly rising sea that sought to assert the extremity of water was turned into nothingness. A basic and simple manifestation of the shocking extremity of quintessence was laid out as under it. No authorities that weren't quintessential could move. Their very weavings were nullified, as not just steel, but all prominent primogenitors that were rising against Noah at this moment found themselves unable to utilize any of their extremes. And if they couldn't exert their extremes, what could they do in battle? This was a shocking and unbelievable reality as the gaze of stupor on steel quickly changed, his visage bellowing out as he sought to express his extreme. He was of the 8th gradation. His target was of the 7th. Surely he could at least express his extreme? A radiance flickered, and that was it. A sense of silence and shock spread on the battlefield as a symphony began to play. This is quintessence. The voice of the extremity of quintessence thundered out as in the far distance. The Bard of Vitalis was playing a tune with a stern expression while approaching the distant Noah. Apart from him and the shaken primogenitors who were still trying to mobilize their authorities, the figures of Henry, Commander Feng, Hyperion, and many others, their bodies still vibrated with power as they held traces of quintessence. If not quintessence, they held traces of infinity or tyranny, as even within these concepts, quintessence flowed, so they could be expressed. With a single move, Noah expressed shocking dominance against all the past primogenitors of Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains, as only his people still held a chance, continuing to charge towards him as uniquely. Commander Feng and Henry were leading the charge as others followed behind them. And the weaving of extremes around these two beings simmering with destiny was unique, as they seemed to be collecting and stacking the extremes of those behind them. They knew they couldn't beat Noah with their own authorities. So at this point they tried to take a different path. They read the weavings of their extremes, and with Commander Feng and Henry in the lead, they passed their authorities through them. They intermixed and layered everything towards a single central point, as shockingly around Commander Feng, an illusory celestial purple mountain formed with him being at the very peak. Droves of existential extremity authority coursed from the base of the mountain and towards the peak as space split apart, with it seeming like a massive mountain was smashing towards the extremity of quintessence. But this mountain wasn't alone, as opposite it, with Henry in the lead, a dazzling celestial cerulean mountain also formed as burning with infinity. The Son of Destiny called out, "Existential hyperversal embodiment." Commander Feng called out, "Existential hyperversal embodiment." The single blue mountain spearheaded by Henry pulsed as a moment later, over 10 other celestial mountains similar to it manifested. Strain appeared in the eyes of Henry and those behind him, as it was only after 36 dazzling blue mountains covered all regions of this side of the arena did they stop multiplying, and the purple mountain with Emperor Feng at the very peak. The amalgamation of a massive, illusory, purple-robed emperor appeared behind it, seated on a throne, his right hand grasping the base of the mountain as with an overabundance of tyranny. He prepared to throw it. At the same time, a dazzling glow of gold began to cover the illusory figure of the massive emperor, as Destiny was doing something behind the scenes. It was all part of the contrived plan. In the face of all of this, Noah gazed down coldly as he observed the weavings of unfolding authorities. Plans. They were crucial, yes. But in the face of sheer, unadulterated power, what plans were nothing? While embodying one existential extreme, Noah uttered out silently once more. Existential hyperversal embodiment. Wah! The target this time was none other than infinity. Noah's visage was already imposing enough. His figure gave off an immense sense of suffocation.